It was an ordinary morning at Logan International Airport. Travelers shuffled through security lines, suitcases dragging behind them, voices merging into a constant hum of departures and arrivals. Families clutched passports, parents tried to calm restless children, and business travelers walked briskly with eyes glued to their phones. The terminal buzzed with routine chaos, but amidst the noise, Officer Daniel Hayes stood tall, sharp eyes scanning the crowd. He had walked these same halls hundreds of times before, yet he never allowed himself to become complacent. His partner, a large German shepherd named Coda, padded faithfully beside him, ears twitching, nose testing the air with quiet precision. Where others saw normal travelers, Coda saw patterns, scents, and secrets hidden in plain sight. Daniel trusted him more than anyone. That trust had been built over years of training, countless drills, and long days patrolling side by side. Nothing about today felt different, until Coda froze. The shepherd's body went rigid, tail lifted, gaze fixed on something just beyond the milling passengers. Daniel felt the leash tighten, his heart skipping as he followed Coda's line of sight. Through the shifting crowd, he spotted a little girl, perhaps 7 years old, her small hand locked tightly in the grasp of a woman wearing a bright blue coat. At first glance, they looked like any other pair, a mother hurrying with her child to catch a flight. But Coda didn't believe it, and Daniel had learned the hard way never to ignore his dog's instincts. He studied the girl carefully. Her head hung low, gaze fixed on the floor, shoulders tense. And then he saw it. The child's free hand pressed flat against the back of the woman's coat. It wasn't a wave or a child's idle fidget, it was deliberate. Small fingers trembled as if carving out a silent message. Daniel's pulse quickened. This wasn't random, this was a signal. The girl dared a fleeting glance upward, her wide brown eyes shimmering with fear as they met Coda's steady stare. For a fraction of a second, Daniel swore he saw a plea in them, raw, desperate, silent. Then, her gaze dropped again, lips clamped tight as though she was terrified to make a sound. His stomach sank. Something was very wrong. "All right, boy," Daniel muttered under his breath. "Show me." Coda surged forward, nails clicking on the polished floor. Daniel adjusted his pace, weaving through the current of passengers. The woman never looked back. Her grip on the child's wrist was firm, controlling, almost possessive. Again, the girl's small hand pressed against the fabric of that blue coat, this time shaking more violently. Daniel had seen that type of movement before, in people too scared to speak. It was the body's last resort, a desperate cry when words were impossible. Coda's low growl rumbled deep in his chest, though most travelers were too distracted to notice. Daniel kept his eyes locked on the pair, trailing them as they approached the security checkpoint. The woman handed over their documents with a smile that seemed rehearsed, her voice sweet but unnaturally controlled. The officer at the desk frowned, examining the papers with suspicion. Something about them clearly didn't add up. Before he could question further, Coda barked, a single commanding sound that cut through the entire terminal. The noise was sharp enough to freeze conversations mid-sentence, heads whipping around to see what had triggered the outburst. The little girl flinched, her lips trembling as if forming words too fragile to release. Daniel read them anyway, even without sound. "Help me." His chest tightened. His eyes shifted quickly to notice another child, a small boy, no older than 5, clinging to a worn stuffed bear as if it were the only safe anchor in his fragile world. His presence made the situation even more urgent. The woman's smile cracked under the weight of Coda's bark. Her voice snapped, defensive. "Is there a problem, officer?" "These are my children." But Daniel saw the way her hand tightened cruelly around the girl's wrist, enough to make her wince in pain. Coda barked again, louder, straining against the leash with teeth bared. The atmosphere changed instantly. Passengers nearby backed away, whispers sweeping through the terminal. The sense of normalcy evaporated, replaced by a thick tension that crackled in the air. Daniel stepped forward, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside." Her expression hardened. "We have a flight to catch. You're wasting your time." Her tone had shifted from sweetness to sharpness, defensive walls rising fast, but Daniel didn't flinch. His eyes darted once more to the girl, who now had tears welling in her eyes. Silent, desperate, pleading. That was all he needed. With firm authority, he gave the order. Take them in for questioning. Now, security personnel closed in swiftly, surrounding the woman and the children. At first, she resisted, her protests rising in pitch and volume. But as they were led into a private room, her act began to falter. Inside the room, the children were offered seats while the woman paced, muttering about inconvenience and harassment. Daniel knelt down in front of the little girl, softening his voice. You're safe now. Can you tell me what's happening? Her tiny hands shook, fingers twisting together as if unsure whether she should speak. Finally, she whispered the words that shattered the charade. She's not my mother. The silence that followed was suffocating. Coda, lying calmly near the door, lifted his head as if he'd been waiting for that truth all along. Investigators quickly verified the documents, finding inconsistencies that confirmed the girl's claim. The woman's story crumbled under scrutiny, and within minutes, her facade collapsed entirely. She wasn't their mother. She wasn't even a relative. She was part of a larger trafficking network, moving children under false names and fake documents, exploiting the busyness of airports to go unnoticed. But not today. Not with Coda there. The girl, Emily, clung tightly to her little brother Jacob, tears streaming down her face as she finally let herself cry. I tried to tell someone, she sobbed, but no one saw me. Daniel's throat tightened. He glanced at Coda, whose steady amber eyes held no doubt, only patience. Someone did, Daniel said softly, resting a hand on Emily's shoulder. He saw you. Emily turned, her small arms wrapping around the shepherd's thick fur. She buried her face in his neck, whispering words only he could hear. Thank you. Coda remained still, calm, his presence grounding her in a way no human could. For a long moment the room was silent, except for the muffled sound of announcements echoing faintly from the terminal outside. The woman, whose real name was later confirmed as Marissa Cole, sat with her arms crossed, a mask of defiance plastered across her face, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. She wasn't a mother, she wasn't a guardian, she was a predator hiding in plain sight. When confronted with the truth, she tried one last time to maintain control. You're making a mistake, she hissed, her voice shaking as much as her hands. Those kids belong to me. But the documents had already been disproven. Within minutes, law enforcement produced evidence that connected her to an international trafficking ring that had eluded detection for months. Her calm veneer finally shattered when officers moved to restrain her. Her protests rose into shrieks, echoing off the small room's walls as handcuffs snapped around her wrists. But Daniel barely listened. His attention remained fixed on Emily and Jacob, two small lives that had been plucked from a nightmare before it consumed them. Emily refused to let go of her brother, who clutched his stuffed bear so tightly his knuckles turned white. Daniel crouched beside them again, lowering his voice to a soothing tone. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you. Emily's eyes, still wet with tears, searched his face as if trying to decide whether she could believe him. And then she looked at Coda, the great shepherd lying calmly at her feet. His steady breathing, the warmth of his presence anchored her. She leaned into him again, fingers tangling in his thick fur. He knew, she whispered, as though saying it aloud would make it more real. Daniel's throat tightened. Yes, he said, voice breaking slightly. He knew. News of the incident spread quickly through the terminal. Travelers who had witnessed the confrontation gathered in hushed groups, whispering about the officer and his dog who had stopped something terrible before it was too late. By the time Daniel and Coda emerged from the security room, guiding Emily and Jacob toward a waiting child protection team, the crowd outside erupted into soft applause. Many people didn't even fully understand what had happened. They just knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The sight of a little girl hugging a police dog with such fierce gratitude told them more than words ever could. As Marissa was led away in handcuffs, her voice drowned out by the murmurs of disgust from onlookers, Daniel felt a swell of conflicting emotions. Relief at the rescue, anger at the cruelty that had almost succeeded, and pride in the partner who had once again proven that instincts were sometimes more powerful than logic. Coda trotted faithfully at his side, tail swaying slowly, eyes calm as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But Daniel knew better. He knew that without Coda's unwavering intuition, Emily and Jacob might have disappeared forever into the shadows of a trafficking network. The thought made his stomach churn. Later, in the quiet of the precinct office, Emily was given warm food, a blanket, and the safety of caring social workers who promised she and Jacob would be taken to a secure place. Still, she clung to Coda, her small hands refusing to release him. Daniel sat nearby, exhaustion pressing against his shoulders, but unable to rest just yet. He watched Emily whispering to the shepherd, her face pressed against his fur, and it struck him how often children trusted animals more than adults. Perhaps it was because animals didn't lie, they didn't pretend, they simply were, and that simplicity, that honesty, was what saved her. Reporters soon swarmed the precinct, eager to capture the story of a police dog who had stopped a crime no one else noticed. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward, but Daniel kept his distance. He didn't care about the headlines. What mattered were the children, now safe. What mattered was Coda, who lay quietly, unconcerned by the attention, as though all of this were just another day's work. "Heroes don't always wear uniforms," Daniel murmured to himself, watching the shepherd lift his head and blink slowly. "Sometimes they walk on four paws." When it was time for Emily and Jacob to be taken to protective services, Emily hesitated. She turned to Daniel, her eyes wide with fear that letting go meant losing safety again. Daniel knelt down, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're brave," he told her softly, "and you're going to be okay." She nodded but still reached out for Coda one last time. The shepherd stood patiently as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice steadier this time, no longer broken but filled with a fragile kind of hope. Daniel blinked hard, fighting the sting in his own eyes. In that moment, he understood what she was really saying. Not just, "Thank you for saving her," but "Thank you for seeing her when no one else did." As the car carrying Emily and Jacob pulled away, Daniel stood beside Coda, watching until the vehicle disappeared into the city's busy streets. The terminal had returned to its usual chaos by then, announcements blaring, people rushing, life moving on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Daniel, nothing about this day would ever be ordinary again. He reached down, scratching behind Coda's ears. "Good work, partner," he said quietly. Coda leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly, and Daniel allowed himself a rare smile. In the days that followed, the story spread far beyond the walls of the airport. News outlets replayed the footage, social media lit up with messages praising the courage of a little girl who gave a silent signal, the sharp instincts of a German shepherd, and the unbreakable partnership between man and dog. Strangers sent letters, drawings from children, and even offers of gifts for Coda. But Daniel kept returning to one truth. The real gift was that two children were alive and free, no longer in the grip of fear. And so the story closed, not with fanfare, but with something quieter, something deeper. Emily's whispered words still echoed in Daniel's mind, and perhaps always would. Heroes weren't defined by glory or recognition. They were defined by the moment they chose to act, to notice, to listen. And sometimes those heroes had four paws, a wagging tail, and the unwavering loyalty to save a life with nothing more than a bark.